Kia ora, welcome to our new book. It's going to be Lion Boy by Zizou Corda. Before I start reading, I thought you might like to know a little bit about the author. It's quite an unusual story because the author is not one, but two people. Here they are. I'll read you what it says about them. Zizou Corda is a pseudonym, which means a false name, used by Isabel Adomakar Young and Louisa Young. Zizou Corda is Louisa Young and Isabel Adomakar Young, whose names are too long to fit on the front of a book. Louisa is a grown-up and has written 5 grown-up books. Isabel is a kid and has written mostly schoolwork. The original Zizou is Isabel's lizard, only he spells it Zizou. They have written 4 books together, the highly acclaimed Lion Boy trilogy, and their new novel is called Lee Raven, Boy Thief. They live in London, and only one of them goes to school. So, now you know about the author. And Isabel was in year 6 when she wrote this book alongside her mum. So she was about 11 years old in the UK to be year 6. And it just goes to show that anybody of any age can write books and be successful and develop stories and be an author. So if you're inspired to write, make sure you have a go. Now, let's find out about Lion Boy. There's a little letter at the beginning. Dear reader, no one can tell what will definitely happen in the future, but we can tell what won't. For example, the Orient Express won't leave from the Gare d'Austerlitz. It has always gone from the Gare de l'Est. The River Seine won't be big enough to take a ship the size of Circe. She would never get beyond Rouen. I don't know for sure that anyone will be able to talk cat, but I don't know for sure that they won't either. Other than that, this story is pretty much real, or it could be. With best wishes and hoping you enjoy the book, Zizou Corda. Now, Chapter 1. One Saturday afternoon in September, Charlie's mum was up a ladder in the backyard doing things to plants halfway up the wall. Charlie didn't know what or care. He liked the yard, the gorgeous honey lemon smell of the flowers and the great big Christmas tree that hung over the back wall with its shiny silver and green and purple fruits that he would harvest towards midwinter and sell at the market. He liked climbing about in the tree and in the ruins beyond, running down to the river and talking to the cats that lived down there. But he didn't care what his mum was doing up the ladder until he heard a shriek and a clatter and a rude word, and he ran out to see. His mum was on all fours, on the ladder, on the ground, with festoons of the honey-smelling plant around her, her red hair wild and her face as white as ice. "Stupid, stupid," she was muttering. "No, you're not," said Charlie. He offered her his hand and she pulled up to her feet, wincing. "You wouldn't be a professor if you were stupid." "Clever people do stupid things," she said. "Let me into the house." She hobbled inside and Charlie followed, worried but not worried, because his mum was the strongest, cleverest, bravest person in the world, apart from his dad, of course, and if anyone could handle falling off a ladder, she could. "Ow!" she said. Charlie had already passed her the arnica, a chocolate biscuit, and a small bottle of her secret shock remedy, which she made in her laboratory, and which smelt of comfort and brandy and sweet winter herbs. "Best take a look," she said, and slid carefully out of the long leather breeches she always wore for outdoor work. "Ow!" they both said, at the sight of the raw red grazes, the pinky purple swellings, and the nasty gashes which adorned her shins. Charlie handed over a clean paper cloth, and Mum dabbed at her wound. "Bring me some blood stopper lotion," she said. 27 red, it's in the rack." She handed Charlie the keys to her lab. Charlie smiled. Mum, Professor Magdalene Start, PhD, MD, PQRST, LPOTP, kept her laboratory locked on strict instructions of the government, indeed of the Empire, because her work was so important that no one was to be allowed to know anything about it, except, of course, for Charlie's dad, Aniba Ashanti, Doctor of Endoterica and Tropical Sciences at the University of Accra in Ghana, currently seconded to London University, Chief of Knowledge of all the tribes of Akan and Brother of Lions, who knew all about it because they worked together. Charlie's dad knew everything that had ever been known about the plants of the West African forests, what they were good for and what was good for them. "Your mum and I have different ways of knowing about the same thing," Dad would say. "Excellent system." Charlie was honoured. Every day these days he was allowed to do new things that showed they realised he was growing up. Last Christmas he'd been allowed to do the whole stall and sell the shiny fruit himself, alone. Coming back from his lessons, he was allowed to hang out for a while at the fountain, drinking sherbets and playing football or awari with the other big kids. And now he was allowed to fetch a lotion from his mother's lab. It felt good being big. "In the rack by the door," Mum said with a little smile. He'd been inside the lab before, of course. As a baby, after they'd come here to London from Africa, he'd practically lived in there. While Mum worked, mixing and smelling and flicking between her burners and her computer screen, he would paddle about the place in a sort of pair of knickers hanging on a wheeled frame. He could scoot and whiz, and once disappeared completely under a table so Mum couldn't find him. He loved his knickers on wheels. He loved the lab too. Because it was in a separate shed in the backyard, it always seemed like a different world. Pushing open the door now, he got a waft of the smell of it. Somewhere between a cake baking, old books, sweet, strong incense, and underneath it all the hard, cold smell of science. It looked like it smelt. The walls were old and panelled with well-polished dark wood. The benches to the left were gleaming steel with glass cupboards, VDU screens, and instruments of the most precise and modern specifications, while to the left a huge old wooden table stood empty, except for a massive globe beneath a rack of hanging dried herbs. Along the back wall were stacked shelf upon shelf of books, ancient leather-bound tomes, colourful paperbacks, smart-looking hardbacks, parchments laid out flat and scrolls rolled up tight and piled carefully, plus CD-ROMs and DVDs, chrome-coloured discs full of information, and old, thick black vinyl discs, which played on a machine with a huge curling horn. It seemed to Charlie that all the knowledge in the world, past and present, lived in his mother's laboratory, and if it didn't, you could find out here where it did live. By the door was a tall, flattish wooden rack made up of rows of shelves. On each shelf was a row of small, shiny, coloured glass bottles, held in place by a little wooden bar along the front. If you looked carefully, you could see the colour was not in the glass, but in the contents of the bottle, and they were arranged in order of colour, like a rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Charlie craned up to where the reds began in the top left-hand corner and scanned along the shelves looking for 27 red. There it was, a deep crimson blood-coloured, only not so thick-looking. He reached up for it, and giving the lab a last yearning look, took it back to where his mother was waiting in the kitchen. "Thank you, sweetie," she said, and was just about to lift the lid and drip a drop of the lotion onto her still bleeding wound when she hesitated. "Bring me a pen and paper," she said suddenly. Charlie fetched one of the strong, swirling glass pens that they used for every day, and the green kitchen ink and a scrap of envelope. "Proper paper," she said, and he bought a piece of heavy, clean parchment from the drawer. Mum pulled herself up, and as she did so, the movement made the blood bubble a little more from her shin. She took no notice. Instead, she lifted her leg and laid it along the kitchen table as if she were doing her yoga or ballet. The parchment lay on the kitchen table. The ink was ignored. Mum took the Venetian pen and cautiously dipped it in the beading blood of her wound. Charlie stared. "Don't worry," she said to him. "I just thought of something I've been meaning to do for a while." He still stared. Mum started to write. By dipping the sharp little nib in her deepest cut, she had enough blood to write a full, elegant paragraph and a signature. "What is it?" he asked, feeling a little ill. "You'll know soon enough," she said. She flapped the parchment gently and watched the scarlet turn to a delicate brown. It looked like a magical text, an ancient spell, a decree by some all-powerful and long-dead king or queen. "I'm putting it up here," she said, as she rolled it up, tied it quickly, and popped it behind the photo of her and Aniba on honeymoon in Venice, on the top shelf of the dresser. "And Charlie—" Here she stopped and looked at him, her blue eyes sure and clear. "If you need to go anywhere, take it with you." A sudden sharp sense of importance welled up inside him. She didn't mean take it to the bathroom or take it when you go to bed. She meant something bigger, more grown-up, more important. Sometimes Charlie felt that the grown-ups around him existed on that other level, talking of things they didn't mention to him, minding things, dealing with things that were not to do with children. Until recently he had ignored it and carried on reading his book or taking extra biscuits when they weren't paying attention. But lately there had been a lot of talking downstairs after he'd gone to bed, a lot of hushed telephone calls and furrowed brows. This look in his mother's eyes, this sudden mysterious writing in blood, were to do with the same things, he was sure. And just then the great noise that heralded the return of Dad started up. There was a Ghanaian song about dinner, delicious mamouna with spicy don don, that he sang to himself whenever he wasn't doing anything else. Tuwe, mamouna, tuwe. You could hear it from the distance as he strolled up the street. Then the firm, solid tread of his feet crossing the yard and the jangle of his big bunch of keys because once again he hadn't noticed the door is unlocked. 3, 2, 1, Charlie counted down in his head, and his timing was perfect. On blast off came Dad's huge voice calling out, "Hello, hello, where's my family?" Charlie's dad, you ought to know, was huge. Not just a big man, but huge. He wasn't technically a giant, but Charlie thought he might have giant blood. And this worried him sometimes, because if his dad had giant blood, then so did he. And that made the whole thing of, "You're a big boy now, growing nice and big like your dad," a different ball game altogether. Charlie was proud and happy to be brown, both black like his dad and white like his mum, he said. But he wasn't sure that he wanted to be a giant as well. Once in a museum, Charlie had seen some armour from ancient Greek times, a breastplate made in the shape of a man's body with all the muscles and even the belly button moulded in beaten bronze. And that's what Charlie's dad looked like when he took his shirt off, like he was still wearing armour. He had huge arms and the veins on them looked like rivers on a map, only they stood out. He had huge legs and shoulders as wide as a small shed and a neck like a tree, and he walked straight and tall and smiling, and everyone got out of his way and turned to look at him after he had passed. When he closed down the smile in his eyes and let his mouth lie stern, he was the most frightening looking man. And then when his smile burst through and his white teeth shone and his eyes crinkled up and his cheeks went into little apple shapes, he was like the god of happiness. "We're in the kitchen," called Mum. "She's broken," called Charlie. "No, I'm not," said Mum, finally dripping the blood-stopper lotion onto her cuts. And the evening descended into a sweet time of Mum lying around telling jokes and Dad cooking dinner, Charlie watching The Simpsons and staying up late because there's no lessons on a Sunday. He forgot all about the parchment written in blood, and he didn't think about it again until 6 months later, when he came home to find that his parents had disappeared. Wow, Charlie's got an interesting family, hasn't he? I wonder what sort of adventures he's going to get up to. That was chapter 1. You'll have to watch again tomorrow for the next chapter. Bye for now.